one reminder before we get into today's program. The annual conference is going to be in Austin, Texas, September 21 and 22. And Debbie tells me that beginning soon, very soon, they're going to start promoting the speakers being invited to the conference and the various topics. So that's exciting. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dave Bruns, who for the past 19 years, nearly 19 years, has been the director of client service at Farella Braun, and someone that I've had the privilege to know and call my friend for, Dave, I think it's 25 years, but still a long time. So without further ado, my friend, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. I really appreciate that. And welcome everybody to this program on collaboration. I'm really excited about it. Jennifer called a couple months ago and asked me to put it together and if I could reach out to our two speakers, Connie and David. And they graciously joined without any questions. So, first, a couple of logistical kinds of things. We're going to just have a moderated discussion today. It'll just be the three of us kind of chatting. Please use the chat feature. If you have any questions, we'll be monitoring that. So we will know if you've got any questions, please ask or commentary throughout. We're going to do our best to keep this to 1 hour. And one of the things that we all agreed to as speakers is if you have any questions or you want to dive deeper into any one of these subjects, we're all willing and able and want to do that. So me, Jennifer said, I'm Dave Bruns. Our one panelist we have is Connie Brenton, who I'm guessing most of you know. She's the CEO and co-founder of LegalOps.com. And then our other speaker, which clearly most of you know from Dancing on the Dance Floor, is David Kaufman, and he's the Director of Global Strategies at Nixon Peabody. So Debbie, can you throw up our poll? Maybe.
Should be seeing it.
I don't see it. Does anybody see poll? That's okay. We can move on. One of the things is I wanted to start with is what I like to kind of, oh, there's the poll. What definition? Collaboration definition. How do you define collaboration? Let us know. There's a few things on here. Click in there really quick. Get some answers for trust-based relationships. Somebody likes the teams idea. I think is there more than 11 of us on?
I think that's everyone.
Yeah, the real answer is all the above, and we're going to dive into this, but it's part of your teams. You got to have teams going for common goals. You got to have a manager that knows how to manage a project and wants to bring together a collaborative situation. You've got to have a trust-based relationship. You also, I think part of that trust is knowing that somebody has your back. So like if you're out on a limb, somebody's there. We kind of put this billing 6/10 of a mile or every phone call, a little bit funny, but that's another way in which to collaborate, right? I mean, you're, from a billing standpoint, from an client understanding and talking to them. So it's really all the above, and we're going to dive into all of these. So the next thing the next section we're going to talk about here, it's kind of, I like to just get things moving and have a conversation, but in the chat, and Connie and David, if you guys just want to shout out, it's called what I like to call word association, kind of a rapid fire way to think about things. I'll throw a word out, you put in chat what first thing that comes to mind or first sentence, so kind of pretty short kind of thing. So the first one I'm going to say is data.
Overwhelming.
Goals.
Messy, drowning in it. Security. Good points. How about aligned goals?
Forcing it too much. I think when people try to get to alignment, sometimes you can spend too much time doing that.
Mm-hmm. What about gratitude?
Grace and connectedness.
Every day, not enough. We need to be have to thank everyone and make it meaningful.
What about the concept of a collaborator?
I think we're all,
Courageous.
yeah, I think we all have to collaborate.
Awesome. I'll throw one out here, though, the me-we ratio.
I was always taught to that you should not leave every one of your sentences with the word I, and so I think it kind of goes the same way. Is that you have to, you know, if you only think about yourself, then it's unlikely. So you'll be successful. So the more you can say we, it's not the royal we, but as a fan of the crown, but we, you know, being everyone is a good idea.
I'm finding that the me-we ratio is way more on the me side of things now, rather than the we, and I keep trying to push that we need to get back to the we. And even to the point, like this week, I was at a conference in Vegas, and you know, there was a little note about if you don't want to use if you don't want a new towel, just hang it up. You know, we're trying to conserve water. And at the end of it, it said, I have saved, you know, 55 billion gallons of water by doing this. And it was signed by the hotel manager. And my first reaction was, you didn't do anything to do this, right? And so why are you taking credit for it? So I'm absolutely, David, you're right on.
You know, as part of prep for this, I listened to a masterclass, and they had a study done by the hospital, and it said they were trying to get people to wash their hands. And they said, okay, I want you to wash your hands. We want you to wash your hands because you won't get sick. And then the second choice was, I want you to wash your hands because the patients won't get sick. And then I want you to wash your hands because it's good hygiene. And the answer that won was, your patients won't get sick, because it went to the soul of why they were even in the profession.
Interesting.
I spent a lot of time on airplanes, and now the new thing is that they say don't put anything into the toilet because clogged toilets mean delayed flights, and I think that's the one thing people fear more than anything else.
That's a great way to put that too. I like that. So, kind of setting the foundation here and moving.
Dave?
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
Clogged toilets, like. All right, sorry.
I do think, though, that all of these examples are a way to collaborate, because it's a way to get common thinking around a agreed upon end result.
Absolutely. That's a nice segue to, like, what types of collaborative teams do you work with?
Connie, do you want to go first? Or you want me to go first?
It doesn't matter.
Well, I mean, so my job is to work with lawyers across our firm, but I also work with lawyers across the world, because, you know, even though we're an international law firm, we don't have offices all over the world, and we don't have offices in every U.S. state. So, you know, part of my responsibility is to, you know, handle complex projects that involve multiple countries, multiple jurisdictions. And so therefore I have to put together teams of lawyers that, you know, speak different languages, that have, you know, different cultural backgrounds, that, you know, exist in different time zones. So I like to say that essentially, essentially my job is business development, but really what I do is diplomacy, because I have to get people that I have absolutely no control over, including my own partners, to do exactly what I want them to do. And that requires a lot of collaboration and subtle skills to kind of get people to do what I want them to do. But it's mostly lawyers that I work with. I do collaborate across the functional teams, the functional areas. Those are actually much easier to work with. One of my colleagues I saw was on. That's actually much easier than working with the lawyers themselves.
I think we are, if you really think about it, we are collaborating almost every single minute of every single day. Whether it be a formal collaboration between our teams, or formal collaboration between legal and the business. It also exists with our children, with our spouses, with our medical care providers. If you're on the dance floor, it is everywhere. And honestly, I think if we can think about being authentic and in the moment and courageous and vulnerable, that's when we are the best collaborators. And David, you also alluded to this, good listeners, because you need to understand where is the other person coming from. How are you going to have a conversation where you end up with a shared outcome?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I was asked recently, would you rather have someone have a overt agenda, that they're aggressively pursuing, that that's their agenda, or would you rather them have a hidden agenda? And I'm always saying, I'd rather know sometimes it's easy to figure out what they're going for, but I'd rather them tell me this is what's important to me, instead of me trying to have to bring that out.
Mhm.
And because once I know that that's what they need and what they want, then it's much easier to find a solution that will work for all of us. But when I don't know why, what's pushing their buttons, then it's much harder to do that.
Leveraging off that, one of the things that we talked about in our prep session was kind of building this concept of a collaboration mindset. And you had identified like 4 or 5 different things, one being kind of what are the goals, right? But like, can you dive into that? Like, Connie, I think you led this a little bit. Like, how do you develop that collaboration mindset among a team or in building a team?
So good collaborators get out of our comfort zones. And I have a saying, do something every day that scares you. Because true collaboration means belonging, and it is not at all passive. So you need to create an environment and a culture that is also safe. But it's a funny blend there, because it needs to be safe, and you also have to encourage tough conversations. You have to encourage people to be accountable, not only to each other, but to themselves. And you have to encourage people to speak up if they think something's wrong. And we were talking about, here's a good example of that plane that crashed in Washington State. And the co-pilot said, we're running out of gas. I think it's in the book Blink. We're running out of gas. We're running out of gas. We're running out of gas. But the culture had been so hierarchical that the co-pilot didn't scream at the top of his lungs, we're running out of gas. And they crashed. And hundreds of people were killed in that. So it's the creation of a culture and then the feeding of that it is okay to object. It's okay to speak up, even if you have somebody 2 or 3 levels above you saying do X or Y. And again, I think it's being a good listener.
I really like Connie's comment about, collaboration is not passive. I think that we kind of assume as humans, we're social animals, that we like to, to work together but I don't think I think that you really have to have really good collaboration. You have to be thoughtful about it. You have to think about, how are you arranging things? How are you putting things together? How are you proposing things? A lot of folks left to their own devices will only, think about what works for them. So it requires, if you're, kind of trying to coordinate things and you're kind of leading the collaboration, you need to get engaged. You need to be involved and set the structures to make that work, and have those conversations, discuss it, out there, and develop those lines of communications that keep that collaboration going. Because, I think that collaboration is everywhere. I think it's pervasive. But I don't think it's easy, and I don't think that and I see a lot of behavior that is certainly not, that people are not collaborative.
Mm-hmm. We can, leveraging off that a little bit, we can, do as much planning as we possibly can, right? In terms of trying to come up with all the factors that could potentially affect this mindset and this inability to have collaboration. And I'm reading the chat, and there's a few examples in there. But we had talked a couple things. One was this idea that how do you prepare for, we're kind of collaborating for success, But in developing that success, sometimes things don't go exactly as we had planned. So how important is it to think of what could happen to avoid those bad things?
I think it goes down to communications. I think that if you can communicate and you guys are, I like to manage expectations. I think it's great. I love to go after big picture things. I like to go after things, clients that you may think, how are we going to get that person, or a lateral candidate. You think, oh my God, there's no way we can get that person. I love those kind of, impossible tasks, that seem impossible, but you can make them happen. But, you have to be realistic and understand this is going to be tough. This is going to be challenging. And then along the way, you have to communicate. I mean, it's just, the worst thing is that if you don't have conversations around where are we, what's happening, what's it look like now? And then then you're surprised when it doesn't work out. Then I think that's a bigger challenge.
So I also think that depending on, and I talked about it before, but we're collaborating all the time. And so depending on the criticality of the outcome will determine how you set up the collaboration. So if you are, here's a good example that's outside of law. If you are collaborating across a disease, so somebody has cancer and you have to collaborate between the oncologist and the surgeon, you better have a very good process in place. And for those types of activities, or for the big matters in a law firm, there needs to be a process. Or if you're going to have a team that's working together over a long period of time, you better know each other. And so it probably makes sense to do one of the assessments, one of the Myers-Briggs or Strength Finders, so that you also understand how to give feedback. We've talked about, okay, you can form and you can create a culture where people can be courageous and give feedback, but not all feedback can be given in the same fashion to a group of individuals. There are some people who have very thin skin, and there are others that if you don't bonk them over the head, they can't hear you. So when you're talking about collaborating, particularly if there is an outcome that is critical to the firm or critical to the business, then more energy needs to go into the building a process around a collaborative team.
I think that's a really a great thing to think about, because I do think that when you have a process, even you get the buy-in, you get people wanting to, they understand what their goals are, they understand what their role is, what's important to them. What I'm hearing too from you is a little bit of a generational issue here, because the younger generations that are in the workforce kind of want more of a daily kind of feedback mechanism, or a in the moment feedback mechanism, where the older generations in the workforce are okay with no feedback, or maybe an annualized feedback mechanism as part of their comp process. So I think that we've got to, within this ability of building our teams and structuring our teams, also have to take into alternative factors or other factors that are important there. And so one of the things I wanted to dive in is, what do you feel are the pillars or tenets that make for successful collaboration? We've mentioned a few, but do you have any others that you want to throw out there?
I think trust is probably number one on that list, just because if you don't trust the people you're working with, then it makes all this becomes impossible. If you can't rely upon someone to be thinking about how that's going to impact you as a team member, as a collaborator, if they're not going to carry carry their weight, do their job, if they're not going to be honest with you, then it's going to be very hard to have any form of collaboration that goes on. So I think unless you can trust people, then that makes collaboration very difficult. I mean, that's one of the values of like the network, law firm networks and things like that, is that you get to know people and develop a relationship with them. And so that when I work with folks that I've worked with for a long period of time, one of the key things you're building up is that trust, is the fact that we know each other on a personal level, that we have a lot of mutual and of values, things like that, and that person feels like we will work together, collaboratively.
Connie, you talked about the fragility of this and the delicacy and how to deal with that. You want to dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think Gina, you had something in the chat that said it takes something to the effect that you need to contribute to the relationship for a long period of time, because if you are, it takes a long time to develop trust. You can destroy trust in a blink of an eye. So the more you have fed that trust relationship, the less fragile it becomes. However, you really, depending on the severity of the perceived transgression, trust can not only be destroyed quickly, it can be destroyed forever. And I used to be a dog trainer in my olden days, and the worst kind of aggression, and I was an aggressive dog trainer, so I only dealt with aggressive dogs. The most dangerous were female dog to female dog. So I'm just going to put that out there. And it never resolved. So when we had those instances, one of the dogs had to be removed. So you never want to get to that point, but, and with a dog fight that was male to male, one dog would win and they'd be like, okay, I get it, you're bigger and stronger, and that would be the end of that. So I think we also should be talking about how is trust destroyed, and because it is fragile, and then how do you rebuild it? Because
I think that's super fascinating, Connie, because I think that for I've always heard the expression that guys can develop, they can sit next to a bar with somebody for an evening and they're best friends, but then but then throw them under the bus the next day, whereas women, it takes a lot longer to develop relationship, and then those relationships are more steady. And I think that's probably very, very true. I think that's looking at those gender issues is incredibly important and interesting.
And it goes back to what Dave was saying about the new associates that are coming into the workplace. They require more feedback, so we'd better give them more feedback. And maybe it's good for all of us.
I think so. I personally, in my world, I try and give as much feedback as I can, kind of in the moment, in various ways. In the moment, long term. Sometimes I'll sit down and talk to a team member, be like, okay, I want you to self-reflect on what just happened, and then let's have a conversation tomorrow, because that way they know that I wasn't exactly impressed with what they did, but it's also, I want them to learn, so I take a lot of different approaches to ensure that kind of the messages that I get are being internalized, and that they can, get back into a trust situation. I think that's really important, and rehabilitate that trust. One of the things we also wanted to talk about a little bit is, does technology help or hurt collaboration?
I'm a process person, so technology helps. It puts process around, what to expect. There's clarity, there's a way to communicate. Now, that can backfire, because if you have people within the collaboration unit who hates technology, and you're telling them you've got to get on to technology in order to talk to me, then we have another dynamic that needs to be addressed. And again, one of the other conversations, and sometimes difficult conversations, that you have to say, you're going to have to overcome your fear. Because we have 100 people in this group, we've got to have some kind of unified way to collaborate. So you may have to get comfortable with the technology, and any change management as you're building a collaboration team adds a difficult component
Yeah, well, I think that we're all the pandemic, COVID made us all rely on technology to build teams and manage teams and coordinate teams, and many of you that have kind of a distributed team network, David's flying all over the world trying to create teams, you can't do that without technology. There has to be a technology element.
But I would push back a little bit and say that I think that, I agree with the technology can be helpful, but I also think that, it's sometimes used as a crutch, and and it can get in the way of having a real conversation with somebody. And I think the idea that picking up the phone, I think that's one thing I've noticed by this new generation is that the idea that, okay, I want to talk to you, I don't want to text you, I don't want to send you an email, I want to talk to you because I want to tell you what's going on. I had a situation with an associate where she just wasn't really getting it. It was a transaction, she wasn't really getting it. And I said, just give me a call sometime today and I want to talk to you about this. And she writes back and said, well, do you want to set up a time? I'm like, no, I don't need to set up a time, we don't need a Zoom, just call me. And so she said, okay. And then she finally calls me and she's like, what did you have to tell me on this call that you couldn't put in an email? And I was like, it's nothing kind of surreptitious. It's just that, I don't think you're totally getting what I'm trying to explain in the email. And I want to tell you what I want. I want you to respond back to me. And then I'm going to give you some immediate feedback. She's like, oh, that's kind of interesting. It's like, she'd never experienced that before. So I think the notion is that, we need to find ways to sit down and talk to each other. And, I think that to the extent that technology can make that, less, not happen or less important, then I think that's a problem. Also, it's, how many times have you you asked somebody about something and they said, oh, I put it in the report that I sent to you, or I put it on the smart sheet, or I put it on the spreadsheet. It's like, okay, well, that was like a big deal. Like, that's the kind of thing where if the transaction can't go forward unless we have this $4,000 payment to this vendor, then that's something you should have called and told me that's happening. Don't put it on the smart sheet.
I would add that I think that I think technology is really helpful. I think that we have Zoom, we can see each other and you can have that connection. But I also think it's very important that you break bread with people. You need to sit down and have a meal, whether that's a lunch meal or a dinner meal, but something that is not just work related or focused on the specific topic that you have going on, but so that you can, kind of meet people, so that you learn that Connie was a dog trainer and that she's got, this whole other life out there, with kids and with families and things of that nature. And, that David's a, triathlon guy and swims in the bay on a regular basis, which to me seems ew. But I think that you don't find out about those things unless you really sit down and have the ability to have a conversation where you can just chat and get to know each other and build that relationship and build those bonds. I think that's really important.
So we had a question in, and I think it was Gina again, that asked about what is technology, because there's a whole plethora of technology out there. Some of it is how to communicate. Others technology is how do you track? How do you capture data? Because oftentimes we are collaborating to achieve a defined and common business purpose. So I want to be able to see spreadsheets, and I want to be able to see trending. I want there to be a legal project management component of big projects. So I think that technology not is just how do we talk to one another, but how do we validate, first of all, define our goals, and then validate that we're actually moving closer to the defined common business purpose. We also have to remember that one last thing, most people need to hear something 8 times before it gets internalized.
Yeah, I was going to say, Connie, you went fairly deep in our early conversation about this particular issue. When you have different service providers, maybe, or different technologies within one collaboration unit, and they have conflict, how do you balance that, or how do you get through that conflict when the tools that you're using aren't necessarily communicating or causing a conflict, whether, and I think you went pretty deep into this. Can you dive into that a little bit?
So this is, how do you put a technology stack together? And because right now there really is no good, it's like putting together a stereo system in the olden days. You get a speaker from this provider, and you get a turntable from this provider. Not that I'm dating myself. And they have to work together in order to get to an outcome, not a optimal outcome, but to an outcome. And many times you need to bring providers in, and sometimes they will be competitors, because in the CLM space, the contract lifecycle management space, there are all kinds of providers that say they do everything, but they're really good at the pre-signature, and somebody might be good at the post-signature, and they have to come together. This is where, and David, you and I talked about this, collaboration is not always about group consensus. Sometimes it has to be about dictating, we will figure out a way to work together. Because if you don't make amends, if you don't come to the table, we can't get the technologies to talk to one another. And so who cares if you have something good on the front end if you can't get all the way through, if you can't get them integrated with one another and going to the back.
Mhm.
Connie, thank you for reminding me of the time when I was 17 and putting my car sound system together. You know, I had to get the speakers from one place,
Yep.
and I got my cassette tape player. The younger people on the call probably know what I'm talking about. And then they had this new technology that came on that was a CD player, and I wanted to get one of those in my car, and it was always very complicated because they didn't always talk to each other.
Well,
And then you get a brand new technology and you're like, ooh, I got to integrate it into the middle.
Exactly.
Yeah, everybody needs to come to the table and talk to one another in order to make that happen.
My first car was a Ford Bronco 2.
Love it.
That's
I had a
funny.
VW Bug.
I won my first car, actually. I was 16, and in a raffle, you know, at the Elks Lodge, I bought $20 worth of tickets and won a car, won a truck.
Oh my gosh.
How cool is
Tim
that?
Shannon, I did not have an 8-track tape in my car. I'm not that.
It came with an AM radio, though, so I did have to go through this whole process of building a stereo. Moving on, David, you had a story or it was a little bit of a case study on pricing and developing pricing proposals. Can you dive into that for us?
Well, yeah, I was talking about the fact that, you know, part of my job is to do these kind of very complex transactions across geographies, you know, being collaborative and trying to be a nice guy. You know, you reach out to people and say, okay, you know, you can define the scope really well. And then, you know, this is many years ago when I first started doing this, and I thought I defined the scope really well, and I picked my 8 or 9 different partners that I wanted to work with around the world that I thought were good. A lot of them members of our Terralex network. And then I sent out the scope and I said, you know, please come back with your pricing. And the yawning gap between the lowest and the highest of the cost was, for me, it was like shocking. You know, it was like, you know, one country was $5,000, the other country was like $55,000. And trying to get, you know, pull that back together to some kind of rationale made it incredibly difficult. So nobody was really happy. It really was very difficult. So I learned that, you know, what I do, and it's not that secret, but what I do is then now, if I have a project, I'll reach out to 2 or 3 firms that I want to work with, that are interested in working with on a project that I trust, you know, have a high degree of trust. If you have 1 to 10 trust, these people are on my 9 and 10s. And I'll say, like, here's the scope, you know, what do you think this is going to cost? And then I have a conversation with it. I don't just send it off and send me an email. Let's have a conversation about it. So they walk through, and then I try to figure out what's going to be. And then I reach out to the people I'm working with, and I'll say, okay, here's the deal. This is the scope. And, you know, the client is going to budget $5,000 to do this project. And so, and most of the time, honestly, they come back and say, okay, yeah, we can do it for that. Sometimes, you know, someone will come back and say, in our country, this is much more complicated. We really can't do that. We have to do it this way. It's going to be this, and then we can figure it out. But it has radically changed. It made my life so much easier. And I had a project 2 years ago. We had 26 different countries, and it made it a lot easier to do it that way.
On the pricing space, Connie, you talked about the utopia of fixed fees, or the dystopia.
Yeah, this is a really good example of collaboration, because we made a very deliberate decision to put focus on going to a fixed fee. We actually got to an 87% fixed fee arrangement. If I were to do a do-over, I would have a different conversation with the firms, because we needed to be more clear on what the outcome we were looking for should be. I was looking for a change in behavior. I should have made that very clear at the outset. And if I would have, I think we probably would not have gotten to the 87% range, because what happened is, I'll give you an example of what worked and then where we ended up. So I had a very good relationship with the partner at MoFo. We set up, I was willing to pay a little bit more than I would have had we not gone to fixed fee, because about 10% gets taken up in administrative costs. So just to manage the hourly just add 10% from our side. So we set up a spreadsheet, and then we started talking about how we could work differently. Who could come in, and could we bring in interns? Could we bring in associates? How much of the work could we automate? Knowing that it may end up costing a little bit more the first time. But I was really looking for a behavior change. And in that instance, it worked. But we had very well-defined goals. We had very well-defined metrics. There was clarity in our expectation. Another firm, we went to fixed fees, and I would ask for detail behind. And the answer I would get from the firm is, why are you asking for this? We're on fixed fees. We should be able to do whatever we do behind the scenes. And I thought, okay, I'll take it. I agree. It's one of the benefits of fixed fee. And then the first of the year came, and we got the standard, here are the price increases for each one of the partners. And I said, why are you handing this to me? This doesn't matter to me at all. Well, it's part of the business, the way the law firms, and most of them, big firms, do business. It's a requirement. Doesn't matter how you're billing. So you see, I got the complete different end of the spectrum. We haven't changed the way we work. We can't change the way we work. And so at the end of the day, we had to go back to hourly, because what happened in most of our cases is I simply lost track. I lost visibility to the raw data. So that's a good example of, okay, if you're really going to collaborate, be clear about your goal and work together in terms of how are you going to get there, so it ends up being a win-win.
I think in all these scenarios, I think even, you talk about pricing, but I think feedback is critically important. And how do you give feedback? Because I think that, oftentimes when you're working with a service provider or another law firm, whatever, and you set up expectations, you understand what's going on, you have to be prepared that, if someone doesn't meet the expectations. And I think how you communicate and how you do that is just as important than as when you set it up at the very beginning. And so, when Connie was giving that excellent feedback back to them, I think that's the point where, they should have been kind of adjusting their behavior.
Well, one of the things that we talked about was this idea of norms, and you touched on it a little bit, Connie, but like this idea that, you know, it's easier to stick within your norms. And so you're going to go back to what your comfort zone is, you know, and I think we see that quite a bit as law firms themselves, like, you know, you go out a little bit and then you see them retreat. And, you know, because I think that concept of failure, right, and the concept of failure is scary, is a hard one for law firms, and therefore many of the teams that we work with, right? I think with my team, you know, failing isn't, you know, I talk to them about it and I'm like, let's try this out. Like, you know, yesterday I took a transcript of a program like that we had done just like this, a webinar, and put it through Chat GPT, and it gave me 800 words geared right towards the audience that we were trying to send it to. And it took me, you know, probably 4 times to get it to be kind of in the shape that I wanted it to, or that I thought it would be. And then we just sent it off to the lawyers to say, make this edit, right? Well, in my world, that's not that scary, but for the lawyer's world, because it's so new, there's a lot of scare and a fear factor there. And so I think that setting those norms and making sure that it's okay to push those norms is part of this effort too. If I'm remembering how that conversation went, isn't that correct, Connie?
Exactly. It's exactly. In the case of fixed fees, you had to change a whole business model. And so just generally, it was an impossible ask. So you have to then take it in tinier bites. All right, we won't ask for what we need to put the focus on is maybe not the pricing, but how the matter is staffed. Right? Come and look at it from a different perspective, because that ultimately affects the pricing.
This dives pretty into kind of our next subject really nicely, because one of the things we talked a lot about too, and was this idea of being purpose driven and being intentional in developing these relationships, you know. And so how do you go about that? How do you go about putting intentionality into your relationships so that you're building the trust that you need to drive these collaborative goals?
I think it starts with you. I mean, if you're going to be the leader of this, you're going to be the coordinator. If you're going to be pushing this, then you need to be vulnerable. You need to be authentic. You need to make yourself approachable. You have to, you know, have people kind of, you know, be transparent so people know what you're doing, what you're, you know, why you're doing this, what you're all about. You know, I think that, you know, I try not to be a transactional person. I try to communicate that to people that, you know, that I don't do things transactionally. I don't keep score. You know, I have a friend of mine that, you know, we swim together, and he, you know, then sometimes we have breakfast afterwards. And so he was like very nervous because he couldn't pick up breakfast the next time we were gonna have breakfast together, right? The bagels and lox. And I said, well, I'll just pick it up. He says, no, you picked it up last time. And I said, Bob, I don't keep score. You know, I don't care. I'm picking up, you know, it doesn't make sense. Like, I'm not gonna not have breakfast with you because you know, you can't get the bagels and lox. That makes you feel bad in some way. Like, that doesn't work for me. So I'm just gonna pick it up and do it that way because I'm not transactional. So I think the more you can kind of communicate where you're from, make yourself open and vulnerable, I think that will make people feel like they can open up to you, and you can have that better relationship with them.
I think that idea of not being transactional in your relationship is really key, and really looking for the long term and building relationships that have that longevity to them. And I mean, I look at the people on the screen here, and I've got pretty long-term relationships with most of you, and I could pick up the phone and call most of you, and you would be there for me, you know, because we've built that trust, and we've spent some time feeding, caring these relationships and nurturing these relationships. And Connie, you went into that aspect of it about the importance that you've got to spend time thinking about how do you continue and build on these relationships. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Well, first of all, I completely agree that you need to be a role model, and you need to be a good observer, because even if as you're collaborating and you're building out your team, there will be changes amongst the team members during the collaboration. And this is a process of creating and establishing a shared purpose and goal. What we haven't really talked about here is that there needs to be some celebration. There's got to be some fun. The bedrock of collaboration really is it makes everything fun. You have
That's where the
a
dancing
relationship.
comes in, Connie. You missed it. That's
Exactly.
all full circle.
Exactly. No, exactly. See, that's exactly what, that's how we opened the call. That is the connector between all of these. Okay, we need to build trust. All this heavy, there needs to be a process, a goal, but we also need to have some fun associated with it, because that then keeps us coming back. It also makes it way easier to have those tough and vulnerable and connected and open conversations. That's when you really start to innovate, right? You've got to have, you got to have people shooting ideas back and forth for you to get into that innovation space.
But I mean, I think that's important. I do think that also, like, you know, I think I like to have fun. I think everybody on this call probably knows that. But, you know, I'd like to say that I don't take myself all that seriously, as you can tell with my T-shirts and things like that. But I do take my job very seriously, and I think that's important. Sometimes that gets overlooked. You know, I've had conversations. We had a situation a couple of years ago with a firm that I work a lot with. And you know, the partner was really dropping the ball, and I had 2 conversations with him, and then the behavior continued, and we had deadlines that were being missed and things like that. And I reached out to him again, did not get a call back. You know, called him, emailed him, things like that. And so I reached out to the managing partner of the firm, and you know, the guy called me up and screaming, yelling, you know, I was like, hold on a second. I was like, you don't understand. Like, I gave you enough rope. I gave you all the benefits of the doubt. I said, but at the end of the day, you know, you're not treating me like a friend. You're not treating me like a colleague. If you don't, if you just would have called me back and said, I have a personal problem, I would have said, okay, let's work through this. I'll give you as much protection as you can. But if you don't communicate with me, I have no choice. I have to, take care of my client's interests, and I'm going to do that, but that's just how it has to work. So don't take advantage of me and thinking that, oh, he's just a nice guy and he'll let me go. I can't, that's impossible. That's not sustainable.
I don't know that we dove into this, but earlier, one of the things that stuck in my mind and what you had said is the idea that you've got to make sure that the people you're collaborating with have your back, right? That, you're going to support them and make sure that they're protected, but they also need to do the same and protect you. And I think that that's a key element of what you're leading into right there, David.
Yeah. I mean, I will do anything. I'll hop on an airplane and show up to client's door, on a red eye with hours notice. I'll, do what I can. I'll try to find money to send you to a conference. I'll do what I can to make that work. But, there has to be that understanding that, if I have the same situation, you'll do the same thing for me.
And it goes back to having those tough conversations. When we were putting together the legal metrics portal, we had competitors in the room. So we had PwC, and Elevate is Inspired. All of those compete against one another. And so we had to create, and we had some difficult conversations at the beginning. I need to hold back for one particular reason. Well, that will mean the demise of the entire program. So that can't happen. So it's not only how do you have the difficult conversations, and then how do you recover from it? So you need to also, we haven't talked about a lot about this either, but there needs to be resilience within the team. And when we start talking about generational differences, resilience is trained, and our generation is buck up, buttercup.
So true.
Right?
So true.
And it's different for different personality types, but to have those kinds of conversations, David, you got to have an ability to be resilient on both sides and
Yeah.
get back to even.
Did you, in that situation, did you have that difficult conversation publicly? And by public, I'm saying within like the collaboration space, you know, all three of those vendors there,
Yes.
one meeting, was that a public conversation so everybody could see that this was not a, you know, so because I could see one vendor actually saying we can't do this because of X, but everybody, the other two vendors thinking the same thing. And so there would be value in having a public conversation, getting to the, if this is going to work, all of us have to work together. Or did you do it separately? Kind of, I don't know, how did you go through that process?
There were only 5 of us who put that together. So 5 entities who put that together. And yes, we had that very public, because that's a good point. It's very dangerous to start having these pockets of conversation, because then you start playing, what's that game? You know, pass it along. Yeah, yeah, because, and it wasn't, it was a tough conversation. I mean, it got loud, and we had to go back and get answers, and then we had to decide first of all, can we meet in a space that will work for everybody? And it also brought up, when you start having those difficult conversations, you find out a lot about organizations, and you find out about each person's sensitivities. And that is wildly beneficial if you have a relationship that's going to last for years. And that project we met every single week for over a year. So it was good to get that out. What we also haven't talked about is the form, storm, norm, and perform phase of any collaboration. So you form, and then you immediately go into storm. And so again, we talk about resilience.
Absolutely. So, you know, one of the things is, we've got about 5 more minutes today. What red flags have you seen in your relationships that would suggest that relationship with that collaborator is lost or is in jeopardy? Like, if you're in a situation, what are the flags we should be looking for when we are in these situations of collaborating with people, and, you know, we may perceive it's not going as well as it should? Any comments there?
Yep.
I think it's communications. I think it's all about, you know, how, you know, what you're seeing is about the communications. How do they respond to feedback? How do they respond to any type of criticism? You know, I think the idea is, you know, how are you know, things going along? You know, are they continue to be responsive to you? Is the work quality staying the same? You know, especially when you're working with clients, you know, different cultures deal with this in a different way. You know, a lot of, you know, many countries, you know, they'll tell you immediately if they don't like something that they're getting, but in other countries, you know, they won't. You know, the first indication you have that you're not being successful is that they'll just stop calling you and won't hire you again. So I think the idea is that, you know, you need to be constantly pushing back and evaluating, getting feedback, because, you know, it's not automatic in most cases.
So I agree completely. And in one word, silence. That is just deadly. When I started the conversation with that, I'm in. And when you start getting no response, no pushback, you know that you have an issue with trust. Or on the side of the client, if they start asking you for data, I want you to prove to me that you have done X, Y, Z. That's a red flag. That should be a red flag that something's up. We probably need to have a more broad collaboration. And then I notice, and this happens when I think you have generational collaborative teams, they don't move. They're waiting for instruction. So a lack of initiative, a lack of creativity, a lack of innovation, just waiting because they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to rock the boat. That's when you also have that should be a big red flag, that you have an opportunity to build some trust and encourage.
I think
Sure.
not moving is important. I mean, in terms of, it's the relationship growing. Sometimes when I'm working with a law firm and developing a relationship with them, and I realize, sometimes I realize, wait a minute, I only have a relationship with one partner at this firm. And every time I've tried to expand it beyond that one partner, I have gotten nowhere. And so therefore, I don't have a relationship with this law firm. I have this relationship with this one partner. And that's really not meaningful to me because, I've actually given him access and we've been involved with our whole firm. So it's kind of a, disproportional relationship. And, I think that it's, making sure that you've seen growth, that you are getting more deeply engaged and involved. And if you don't see that, then it's probably not working out that well.
So we're kind of at time, but I wanted to just say, for David and Connie, thank you so much. This has been fantastic and a really amazing conversation. But one last quick little question. If there was one takeaway from today, what would that be? And why don't we start with you, Connie?
Do something every day that scares you.
David?
I think a lot about what your rest of your life is all starts off with your first car. So think about that. But I'll go on Connie's thing. We mentioned it earlier. I said, just say yes. So if someone asks you to do something, your first instinct should be yes. That's the first step to collaborating. It's very easy to say no. There are 999 reasons why you want to say no to something. There might only be one reason you can say yes, maybe just because it fits your schedule. Then say yes.
Awesome. Thank you all. I really appreciate this. This has been a great conversation for me. I've totally enjoyed it. I enjoyed putting it together. I hope you all got a little something out of it. Jennifer, are there any closing remarks?
Debbie, there were 2 polls in the polls, and there is an evaluation poll in here. Should I be launching this? Do we want people to? I don't know.
You can,
why
or
this
I
is in
can.
here. Okay, I'll go ahead and do it. Great. So I'm sure that the college would appreciate it if everyone would take 2 seconds to fill this out before you hang up. It's only 2 questions.
Eek. So I'm not great with feedback. I just assume this be.
All right, I think we have everybody.
If I could put a quick commercial in, there's going to be a whole session on collaboration at the Futures Conference in Austin in September. So come to it.
Excellent. All right, I guess that's a wrap.
Thank you, everyone.
Nice to
Have a
see
great weekend.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.